Good afternoon. This is Mark Miner and Holly DeShields with McGuireWoods Consulting in Austin. On behalf of McGuireWoods LLP and McGuireWoods Consulting, we'd like to welcome everyone to today's panel discussion on issues facing Texas retailers and manufacturers. We're also joined on the line by Governor Jim Hodges, former governor of South Carolina and president and CEO of McGuireWoods Consulting. We hope you'll find today's discussion informative and useful as you navigate the unique business climate we're in. We have a real special panel today, including Peyton Smith, a partner here at McGuireWoods Consulting, George Kelman, president of the Texas Retail Association, and Tony Bennett with the Texas Manufacturers Association. Upon conclusion, the panelists will be happy to answer any questions you might have. Also, a transcript of the entire presentation will be made available for everybody that signed up. So now I'd like to turn over to Holly for the introductions of our distinguished guests.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, my name is Holly DeShields, and I'm co-director of the Austin office alongside Mark Miner, and we greatly appreciate everybody joining us today for this webinar and look forward to some very informative information from our panelists. We would also like to welcome our extra special guest, State Representative Mary Gonzàlez. She is a state representative from House District 75, which is Eastern El Paso County. She was elected to the House in 2012 and is serving her fourth term. And Representative Gonzàlez currently serves on the House Appropriations Committee, the Public Education Committee, and the Local and Content Calendars Committee. So we are very excited to have Mary here with us today. She's a great friend of our firm, highly respected by her fellow legislators, and most importantly, she always keeps her constituents as her #1 priority. So with that, Mary, I'll kick it over to you. And again, thanks a lot for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, Holly, I really appreciate it. I'm grateful to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Gonzàlez. I represent the eastern part of El Paso County. I call it the micro to the macro Texas. It has the fastest growing parts of El Paso City, the agriculture and rural parts of El Paso County. It has the suburbs of El Paso City, Horizon, and Eastlake. It has 263 colonias, communities that don't have sewer and water. It borders Mexico and New Mexico. It has a state park and a Native American nation. So literally, it has a little bit of everything in one district, and I'm really proud to represent it the last nearly going on 9 years now. So I'm eager to talk to you this morning. As you know, the state has been, no one would have predicted that 2020 looks the way that it looks right now. I've been fortunate to be in appropriations for the last 4 years, and we've been really fortunate to have an economy that has been vibrant and allowed the state to continue to grow in a positive trajectory. Obviously, that's not the case. A few months ago, I was really proud to be appointed to the Legislative Budget Board, the board that works to support the financial decisions of the state when we're not in session and appropriations and finance isn't meeting. So I guess, Holly, I'm just going to keep talking unless you want me to jump in with some questions. Is that okay?
Sure, Mary.
Or Holly, I'll just continue. Oh, go ahead.
Could you just give everybody kind of, your analysis of what the next legislative session is going to look like, how, funding is coming down? I know we all think that it's going to be pretty grim, but just, any insight of what's going on in and around the Capitol, as well as what you're seeing across the state, would be super helpful.
Definitely. So when I talk to folks, especially down here in my district, I say 3 things. This next session is going to be very different than obviously any session, not only because of the coronavirus and the budget shortfalls, which are serious and real concerns. We're also going to have a new Speaker of the House. There is going to potentially be some changes in electoral politics and who's on the floor, and not to say what direction that's going to go, but we do know there will be some change. And then it's a redistricting year. And so it's really the perfect combination for more than typical chaos of a legislative session. The comptroller came out a few months ago and said that our biennial revenue estimate is estimated at $4.6 billion revenue shortfall. That does not include what we are expecting for the next biennium. So a lot of things to consider. But here's what I do think is really positive, and because we can really focus on the grim. There's 3 positive things. First is that Texas is in a better position than so many other states. We just have the tools really to survive this better than other spaces. We have the Economic Stabilization Fund. We have a lot of financial techniques that allow us to get a couple extra billion here and there to address the shortfall. And then we have areas in which we can take some cuts. The second thing is the House, and specifically because that's the chamber in which I operate, and I'm sorry there's a train behind me, consequence of living in the country. The House has experience of working in a bipartisan manner. Last session, we were able to pass a $12 billion education property tax reform bill in a way that has really never happened. We've never addressed school finance without court orders, and we did that through the sheer leadership and will and strength and bipartisan efforts of the chamber. And I think there's a lot of desire to keep that kind of energy. And so I really have a lot of faith, and it's hard in this moment to have that, of course, that the House specifically, the legislature, because we've had some experience of wanting to work together, we will come together to figure the dynamics out. So many things to consider, but here's what I will say. I have already, in El Paso, it's 9 o'clock. And this morning alone, I've been on the phone with 10 members of the legislature already thinking through how to get things done for next session. And so what I will say, everyone who's listening on the phone, everyone's a little bit stir crazy. So go ahead and call people because they want to have talks.
That is so true, Mary. Thank you so much. As you're talking to your fellow legislators, what is a little bit of insight on how the logistics of the legislative session are going to work?
That's a great question, and I'm not gonna pretend I have a crystal ball. As far as logistics, I think really, and this is where the domino effect is very real. A lot of these decisions, each chamber gets to make their own rules. So yesterday, I was on another meeting, and Chris Turner gave an example of the House rules, in which in the House rules, men are required to wear suit and ties to come onto the floor. We can make a number of rules when it comes to accessing the floor and the ways in which our committees operate. I think a lot of those decisions will come down to the membership, but also will be very guided by the leadership. So knowing who the next speaker is, and I think that's really a question for members as we determine who the next speaker is going to be, how the speaker candidates, which we don't have any yet, but soon, will approach the health and safety of constituents and of members during this time. But as of right now, it would be hard pressed for me to make any predictions as to what the session's going to look like structurally and process-wise.
Well, we completely understand that, and I think that is a great segue into the managing partner of our Austin office, Peyton Smith. But Representative, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love if you can stay on the line. We might have some questions and answers at the end, or we can circle back around with you if anyone does. Understand if you've got a super busy schedule, but really appreciate your time and your insight today, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So I might stay on just to hear Joey Bennett, so I think he's coming up soon. So, but anyways, yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much. I'll be here. Bye, Holly.
Bye-bye. And Peyton, would you like to take it from here? Peyton is our managing partner of our Austin office, and he is a labor and employment attorney, and we're going to kick it off from there. Thank you.
Great. Hey, thanks, Holly. Yeah, this is Peyton Smith, and I am the office managing partner for McGuireWoods, the law firm component of the firm. We're fortunate to get to share office space in downtown Austin with McGuireWoods Consulting, and it's a seamless transition to be able to work with them, especially going into a legislative session. And I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. I have worked for over 30 years, my entire career, focusing on representing retailers and manufacturers all over the state of Texas as well as nationally. And when you look at what employers are faced with today, it's a unique window of opportunity. You know, there's no doubt that COVID-19 has permanently altered the consumer shopping experience. And with an increasingly digital world, the retail landscape has changed permanently post-COVID-19. Recent Forbes review estimated that 75,000 brick and mortar retail stores are going to close by 2026. But despite the negative information that of course makes us all be concerned about when we think about, is our Bed Bath & Beyond around the corner going to be closed? Are we going to be able to go to the stores that are closest to our home? There is a little glimmer of hope. And that glimmer of hope is that despite the doom and gloom forecast, nearly 89% of retail sales actually happened at stores in 2019. At the end of the day, if customers are given an opportunity, they would rather have an in-store buying experience. The stores that have opened have found that customers are often greeted by enormous lines that snake into the street because of 6-foot distancing, requiring customers to wait for long periods outside. Once they get inside, they're encountering strict measures to prevent the spread of diseases, and that creates a tense buying experience for your customers. Right now, probably more than ever before, retail stores, restaurants are fighting for customers. And if you have a customer in your store, you want to convert that customer into a sale. Some stores have erected temporary paneling, which you've probably seen. If you go to a Hobby Lobby or a Michaels store, for example, or a Joann's fabric store, there are plastic plexiglass panels at the checkout stand, trying to create further distance between you and the employee that is captive at the register, who can't leave that space because they have to close the sale. And all of this stuff is creating further and further distancing between the customer and the personalized shopping experience that is so pivotal for retailers. And all of this together adds up to kind of a disconcerting experience for the customer, and it's one that isn't sustainable in the long term, where customers won't keep coming in. And employers have a legitimate reason to be concerned. You've probably seen some of the articles about concerns that you've probably seen some of the postings that have been up about concerns that employers have about the need for there to be protections in place, employer liability protections, customer liability protections. Unfortunately, as of today, the federal government hasn't stepped up. There is a current proposal from John Cornyn that is in Washington, but it hasn't gained any legs. And with the recent passing of Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg, in the middle of a presidential election, in the middle of additional elections, in the middle of other issues that are facing our country and our states, one wonders whether it's really going to be at the forefront like it needs to be. And employers are justly concerned about what they can do to shield themselves from possible liability from both employees and customers. So what can and should Texas retailers do today? What can they do? I am an advisor to retailers and manufacturers all over the country, tech companies, healthcare companies, but I'm also a trial lawyer. And as a result, whenever I look at these issues and I try to advise companies, you always want to think about, what is the best thing to do? And oftentimes, as an employer, in the absence of legislation or case law to protect you, which is what we have right now with COVID, sometimes the best defense is a really good offense. And the way to do an offense to protect your company is to go ahead and implement as many safety measures as you can, so that if anybody does try to sue you, does make a claim, you have done everything you can to make the shopping experience safe for not only your customers, but your employees. And one of the things that we have all seen as we've gone out to stores recently is that more and more stores and businesses have implemented touchless or self-checkout options. For example, if you follow the CDC guidelines about requiring a mask signage requirement at the front of your store, requiring that your employees wear masks, also putting distance markers on the floor near the checkout area, providing disinfectant at the door, at the point of entry, and at the point of exit. Those are the only real measures the CDC has given to us for what we can try to do to maintain a safe workplace. If you do those things, we recommend, from our perspective, in thinking about litigation down the road, if there is litigation, go ahead and take photographs of the signage of the outside of your store. Take photographs of your employees wearing their mask. Take photographs of the markers in your store and just file them away, showing that you have done everything you can to meet the recommended guidance from the CDC. The issue then becomes, how do you make it a customer-friendly environment in light of all of these PPE measures that are in place that sort of act as a blockade to making it a more personal shopping experience? A lot of our clients have moved up on their call-in orders. They have increased their presence online, trying to drive sales to come into their store and their place of business. Because again, at the end of the day, most customers prefer an in-store shopping experience. Consumer Reports has found that 35% of customers say that an enjoyable shopping experience makes them more likely than not to shop at a particular retailer. 30% say it makes them more likely to purchase more items if they have a pleasant shopping experience. And in a world where we're so sick of being at home and we all long to go to a movie theater and have some popcorn and a Coke and actually interact with each other, there's still distance that's required because of what's happening with the coronavirus. So how do you get customers back in the door? What can you as a business owner do to try to get customers coming back in? I don't want to be the wet blanket in the room, but I have a lot of friends in technology. I've got friends that work at Apple and at Facebook and at Google, and most of the tech companies located in California and in Texas and nationally have told their employees not to expect to return to their physical campus until June or July of 2021. That is nearly a full year away. If that's what they're telling their employees, we need to go ahead and implement right now changes that can be in effect for a while, but that don't push customers away. So how do you do that? You can put in place as much non-touch buying as possible. Implement QR codes if you're a restaurant so that people can scan your menu and you don't have to incur the additional cost of paper menus. Think about adding touchless pay systems if you have the ability to do that with a credit card purchase. The benefit of that we've seen, especially here in Austin, is so many restaurants have struggled that by going to a touchless pay system, you can actually drive higher tip income for your employees. Most of those include a prompt in Austin for 18% as the starting point, and then it goes to 20 or 25% with a notation on the end of your bill that during this difficult time, we're trying hard to support our employees. We would appreciate you being more generous if you can. People automatically do it. It's a way to drive higher tips. Another thing you can do is the example of the Nike store in New York Soho. They were faced with COVID and trying to figure out what to do, and nobody was coming in for shoe purchases, and they had limited people that could come in. So they created a richer experience for customers to make them want to go into the store. They had a little basketball court. They had a little park area with fake grass on it where you could go and test out your tennis shoes in different areas and different services. Whatever you can do to provide a personalized recommendation from your sales team to drive sales is a smart move. And lastly, when you think about what else you can do to freshen up your store and make your online site a sales leader, if you have not taken the time or invested the money yet to update your website, you really need to do so. Your website can be a driver to encourage and nudge customers to not only buy more from your online store, but also as a driver to want to physically come into your store because you kind of whet their appetite about what your store would be like. Now, there is a warning sign. Several years ago, JCPenney decided to go through kind of a retooling of sorts, and they had a massive online and periodical campaign that was inserted in the Sunday newspaper and the Saturday newspaper that made their stores and their merchandise look very hip and cool. It was sort of a very modern, contemporary target ad campaign. But when people actually went to the store to look for those items, they didn't exist. And JCPenney looked exactly the same as it had been for the preceding 5 to 10 year window. And not only did it drive people away in droves, but people got on social media and negatively reviewed JCPenney, causing their sales to go even further down. So don't mislead customers. Play from your strengths. If you've got loyal customers, ask them directly to post positive reviews on social media, to reward loyalty so that you can pull those sales in. And at the very end, I'm essentially a disgruntled salesman / entrepreneur preacher's kid trying to be a labor and employment lawyer. So I'm always thinking about marketing. And one of the biggest things that I want to remind, especially Texas employers of, is you are in a very employer-friendly state. Texas drives business in every way possible. It's the reason we don't have a state income tax. It's the reason why the Texas Retailers Association, the Texas Manufacturers Association, the Texas Association of Business, all of those groups are so strong here and why more and more companies are moving to the state of Texas. As a result of that, especially in the midst of COVID, Closing a sale with an active customer in your store who's a ready, willing, and able buyer has never been more important. You're having probably fewer customers come in your store. You're perhaps having customers with a little bit tighter rein on their checkbook coming into your store, so you don't want to lose that sales opportunity. So it's extremely important that you try the best you can, especially in this polarized political environment, try to keep the politics at home. A sale to someone who you disagree with politically is still a sale. Don't lose that window of opportunity. And make sure that with your employees, you train them and you coach them and support them and give them the ability to perform to increase revenue for you. But if you've got employees that are not performing, if you've got employees who are very casual about the job, who are not trying to help you succeed as a business owner in a tough market, who actually drive customers away, get rid of them. Do not delay that process. Get rid of them and replace them with someone that is going to be excited about the job and will work hard for you. And lastly, I just want to remind everybody that, in this difficult climate, the best thing you can do is treat every single customer, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what kind of vehicle they drive, as if they are your number one client. As we have all seen, there are tech billionaires that look like they may be a homeless person. There are people that are dressed like $1 million who probably didn't buy those clothes. Maybe they took them somewhere. So treat every single customer as if they're your best customer. Don't lose those opportunities, and we're going to all get through this together. It's a long road ahead. I think everybody should prepare for this to go on a while with surges and stops. And so whatever you can do to continue sales when your actual brick and mortar store is closed is a great move, and it's a smart move. And with that, I need to turn the microphone over to George Kellerman. George Kellerman is the president of Texas Retailers Association. And in addition to that, I have the pleasure of calling George a friend. He joined TRA as president and CEO in November of 2015 after returning to Texas following 11 years in Washington, D.C. When he was in Washington, he worked for a variety of different opportunities, but mainly served as a senior VP of government and political affairs at Airports Council International, the trade association representing commercial airports in the U.S. and Canada. He's got a long and distinguished career both in Austin and Washington and across the United States, and we're thrilled to welcome George. I'll pass the mic over to him.
Thank you, Peyton. Appreciate the kind introduction and great laying out of everything that retail has gone through. So I don't know how much more I have to add, but appreciate the opportunity to be here and really appreciate the team at McGuireWoods for everything they do for TRA, particularly Jim Shear, who is our contracted lobbyist and a member of the team at McGuireWoods, and as Peyton as well, who's done some work for us and been a great advisor to a lot of our companies, formally and informally, having spoken at several of our events, always providing good sound guidance. So thanks all very much for the opportunity. I think the best way, first, let me just kind of lay out real quickly what the Texas Retailers Association is. TRA represents the entire retail sector in Texas with the exception of convenience stores. So we represent all of your grocery stores from the 1-2 store operations all the way to, the big corporate chains that everybody knows and loves around the state. And we also represent what we call the traditional or soft goods side of retail, again, from the mom and pop shops on the square all the way through the big box stores that are in your neighborhood and around the state. So we really are the voice of retail here in Texas. In terms of how COVID-19 has impacted the industry, I think to kind of lay it out in a general sense, the easiest way to put it is, probably about 70 to 75% of the industry had a second quarter and now going into a third quarter or in the midst of a third quarter that had been beyond anything they've ever seen in terms of sales and movement of product. I mean, there was a time in the April and May sort of time frame where a lot of our grocers and others were telling us they were having Christmas sales every day. So we saw that kind of activity, and with it came, all sorts of good things, and as far as sales and revenue. But it also brought a lot of other headaches, which we'll cover here in a minute. But it also, the COVID, everything that came with it, also sort of heightened some of the issues that Peyton raised in terms of just how thin of a margin retail operates under, and it heightened, problems that we've seen and heard about for the last several years in terms of, traditional brick and mortar retail stores slowly fading away in favor of more online options. There are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of those reasons predate COVID, but there's no doubt that COVID, if the company was in that situation, the COVID pandemic has certainly aggravated their circumstances. And that's been the unfortunate part. For us, I think the easiest way to kind of go through this is the chronology. As the association that represents the retail industry in Texas, sort of walking through what, beginning in mid-March through where we are today, what we've been through and sort of how we helped our member companies and the industry in general, kind of will help me cover sort of everything that will kind of give you a picture of where retail has been and where we are today. It all started on that Friday the 13th, March 13th. Initially for us, it was a kind of a mad dash to secure transportation waivers at both the state and federal level because particularly on the grocery side and maybe even in some of the big box side, we started to see a run on product. And so our members knew that they needed to be able to resupply very, very quickly. And so that was the initial sort of surge, is securing those waivers for our member companies, which we were able to do, and to be able to keep the supply lines going so that they could restock as quickly as possible. And you saw some of the products that even today still are hard to get, like cleaning supplies. For a while it was meat, eggs, cleaning supplies, some other things. But the industry responded really, really well. That was followed very quickly by the CDC guidelines, which essentially shut down the economy. And that's where the clear divide between the winners and losers kind of started to take shape. Coupled with the CDC guidelines, we had the determination by the Department of Homeland Security CISA division, the Critical and Infrastructure Agency that's part of DHS, determined what was an essential and non-essential business. And that was really the sort of the gulf that was erected between companies and in the retail perspective, stores and companies that were going to do really well and stay open and continue to serve customers and make money in the process, and those that weren't. And so essentially that breakdown comes down to, if you were not selling an essential item, so if you were a department store, a jewelry store, anything that was kind of deemed non-essential, you were not allowed to be open physically. Everybody else was. So your grocers did well, your pharmacies did well, your big kind of retail outlets like, I don't want to name names, but your Walmarts, your Targets, your Home Depots, those kind of big box stores that were deemed essential did really well and have continued to do well. And so that's where we went into the essential versus non-essential. Then we went into what we call affectionately among the TRA team, and Jim Shear knows this well, what we call the whack-a-mole period. Because after the guidelines were issued and you saw lockdowns, you saw an initial order from the governor sort of shutting down schools, and then we had the federal orders talking about what was essential and non-essential. So businesses, some businesses were closed. The interpretation of all this fell to local governments. And so we deemed it the whack-a-mole period because we spent probably 6 weeks every single day, 7 days a week, dealing with mayors, city councils, county commissioners across the state as they dealt with how the pandemic was impacting their particular localities and municipalities, what their case levels look like, what other issues look like. Obviously, politics came into play in terms of how they were interpreting these various guidances and various orders and what that meant for retail. A lot of it had to do with protecting our members and allowing them to stay open and continue to serve their customers in the best way they could, while talking about what Peyton mentioned, implementing all these health and safety procedures, following all the different local ordinances. If you can imagine a company like Walgreens or a company like Target or H-E-B having to follow 254 different sets of rules, that's what it was like at the outset of this and for several weeks. Then, thankfully, Governor Abbott issued a pretty significant set of executive orders that made sort of level the playing field and made the rules statewide. And so it limited the ability of cities and municipalities and counties to kind of have their own rules. It allowed us as a retail industry and as an association helping our members the ability to kind of, really help our members work through all of this and work through it in a way that was level across the way, and you weren't dealing with 254 different jurisdictions and interpretations. And even then, it was still, we were putting out little fires everywhere. Then I think things got very, very politicized as it relates to the mask and face coverings, where you had certain cities kind of push the envelope about the need for enacting mask and face covering orders, enacting other orders related to occupancy that really pushed the envelope of whether that was within the bounds of the law per the executive orders from the governor. Again, putting out a lot of fires, but thankfully in early July, through a lot of work that we did, our members did, we had folks participate on the governor's reopening strike force. The governor issued the statewide face covering order, which for the retail industry was honestly a godsend, because I think it 100% leveled the playing field for what the expectations truly were in terms of what's expected of the business and what's expected of the customers and what's expected of the public in general, and then also what the enforcement mechanism was going to be. So everyone was playing by the same rules and singing off the same sort of sheet of music. So since then, it's actually been very, very calm and very, very stable. Obviously, all of our member companies have implemented and gone, in many cases, gone above and beyond on the health and safety procedures that they have in their stores, the social distancing that's required, the plexiglass that you see, the health and safety of not only specifically first their employees and associates as well as customers, to make sure that we can keep stores open, we can keep putting people through stores and having them get what they need to get, and keep stores resupplied as well. I think some of the positive impacts of the pandemic for the retail industry in general, but I think for a lot of the companies that have been doing this and doing it well, Peyton touched on this a little bit, is the amping up of the online component or the digital component, whether it's direct purchases online that you can either have delivered to your home or pick up curbside, whether it's speaking directly to your customer base through digital platforms, social media, your website, direct emails, to be able to promote yourself, and that's been especially true for the smaller retailers, especially the ones that were closed for about a 6 weeks period. The ability to continue to engage their customers has been huge, and the stores that have really embraced that have tended to be the ones that have done the best, and especially on the small retailer side, have tended to be the ones that have managed to stay afloat. I'll wrap up by just saying that I think going forward, Peyton touched on this as well, the pending issues for the industry really are the liability protection issues. I was on a congressional town hall with a lot of members of our delegation yesterday, and it came up over and over again. First, them thanking the retail industry for staying open, for putting themselves out there, for serving their communities. And I think that's the thing that's most important when we talk about, any potential liability protection that comes for essential companies and essential workforce. That to recognize that, a lot of these folks didn't have a choice. It was either go to work and do what you had to do and serve your community and do it proudly, but also at great risk. So that's definitely a pending issue, as Peyton mentioned, at the federal level. But if it doesn't happen at the federal level, we'll definitely be pushing for it at the state level. And then additional PPP funds, particularly for smaller retailers. I think as this drags on, and again, as Peyton mentioned, it's going to be with us for a while, I think it's the smaller retailer that's really facing the toughest times and really straddling that line between staying open or having to close up shop for good. And that PPP money came in handy the first time and would certainly help keep a lot of folks afloat, another several months, perhaps half a year going forward, to where perhaps things can get a little bit more normal and folks can be back on their feet. So again, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today and look forward to any questions. At this time,
and George, I just wanted to jump in. George, I just wanted to jump in. It's Mark Miner. You guys really did a yeoman job of volunteering, whether it's a legislator calling for 5,000 turkeys or water, or you're always on the front lines and fulfilling what legislators needed and wanted, and no questions asked. You and your members were always there.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. And we get a lot of great help from you all, of course, and from Jim. during that, especially that 6 to 8 week period where we call the whack-a-mole period, it was all hands on deck, dealing with mayors, city councilmen, county commissioners, and so Jim and the team there at McGuireWoods were invaluable, and as they always are.
I still remember the 5,000 turkeys.
Well, that too. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity again, and now let me introduce my friend Tony Bennett, who is president of the Texas Association of Manufacturers, to talk a little bit about how the manufacturers have dealt with everything through the pandemic. Tony?
George, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I do appreciate the opportunity to share our association's perspective with you today. A little bit about the Texas Association of Manufacturers. We represent over 24 major industry sectors in our state. That's 600 manufacturing companies as members, and that includes 70 of the largest industry employers in Texas. Texas manufacturing directly employs over 880,000 Texans, and every manufacturing job in Texas that we can create or retain protects or creates another 3.8 jobs in our state's economy. So it's a critical core element of our state's economy. Texas has a very diverse and resilient economy. It's the 10th largest economy in the world, $1.8 trillion. It's larger than Russia's, Canada's, Mexico's, Spain, or Australia's economy. And Texas remains our nation's #1 exporting state for manufactured goods for the last 14 years running. So this COVID situation was a major challenge for all of us. Since mid-March, our staff and our consultants have been working 10, 12-hour days, sometimes 7 days a week, just trying to keep the essential manufacturing industries open. Like everybody, we have had numerous Zoom conference calls with governor staff, members of Congress, legislators, consulates, the U.S. Embassy, county judges and mayors, just trying to keep payrolls flowing to our Texas communities, keeping these industries open. And I would say that 95% of our member companies' industries were deemed essential and kept operating, which was great, while keeping COVID at bay. The intensity of some of these communications were like, going through a legislative session. For instance, working with our aerospace and automotive and tech members about Mexico supplier issues, communicating with the Texas Secretary of State and the National Association of Manufacturers and the Mexico City Embassy, sometimes on a daily basis for several weeks, just to keep the flow, the supply chain running in a northerly direction to Texas. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the closure of our Texas borders to our adjoining states for several weeks, and even to airline passengers that were flying in from other states for a while, that was really a serious consequence, and we had to work our way through that with our government leaders. It gets very serious when thousands of employees can't get to work across the state line. But we did get that worked out eventually. So how quick we can get back to normal depends on what specific industry sectors, we're talking about. And like I said, we have more than 24 that we deal with here. But just to give you a taste of it, the automotive sector, for example, despite most of TAM industries being declared essential and operating during COVID, the automotive sector had to shut down in late March due to the sudden slowdown in demand and component supplier issues. They started ramping back up in June, but some of our automakers are continuing to struggle with reopening. They're slowed by above average absenteeism. They have, some coronavirus cases that they have to deal with. Both domestic plants and our international suppliers, are a challenge in some respects. So another full or partial shutdown of plants would be devastating. So we're all trying to prevent that. We were pleasantly surprised when record truck and large SUV sales, caused many thousands of contract workers to come back and meet that demand. But, the selection at your auto dealers around Texas, it's limited, and we're still not back to 100%, but we're working on it. Aerospace defense, that would be, your major federal contractors like Lockheed and Boeing, et cetera. They generally remain pretty steady through COVID. Department of Defense contracts continue to allow those operations and that work to be done. However, many of the companies have experienced, the severe Mexican supply chain issues, the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. That really played a lot of havoc, and we spent a lot of time working on that. Technology, semiconductors, everybody's at home, so strong demand exists for any of that kind of equipment, computers, et cetera. The, companies are also stockpiling semiconductor chips for numerous industrial applications. Chips are all over your automobile, sensors, chips and everything electronic these days, and everything internet. So, many companies are stockpiling chips in case there is more COVID-related disruptions. So our semiconductor plants here in Texas are working full speed. Petrochemical, PPE-related plastics, chlorine, disinfectants, hand sanitizers, all of that is in high demand. I think the market is just now keeping up with the demand, and you're starting to see, more supplies of that. But I think everybody would admit the first several months of this crisis, it was hard to get your hands on hand sanitizer and things of that nature. So many industries are now experiencing backup orders for durable goods. Anything home related. If you go out and buy a refrigerator or a stove from Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, they may tell you it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks before you get that product. Building products like lumber, panel products, doors, windows, anything that goes into a house, major delays. So your house is not going to be finished in 6 months like it might have been, pre-COVID. So you've got just about every major durable good shipments are behind by a few weeks. Fuel, refining, you're seeing an accelerated demand for transport fuels. Thankfully, people are starting to drive again. With the exception of aviation fuels, that's going to lag for many more months. People are not flying like they used to, and we all are aware of that. Motor fuels this summer saw an increasing demand because people are jumped in the car this summer rather than get on an airplane. Diesel fuel has been in high demand because more freight is moving via 18-wheelers on our nation's highways, and so trucking activity is above average in most U.S. regions. The oil and gas fields of Texas, the Permian, the Eagle Ford, the rig count fell by more than 70% since March. We're down to 106 rigs today, and from a high of 423 a year ago. The oil workers currently working today about 155,000. That's down from a high of nearly 300,000. So with WTI crude around $40 a barrel today, some of these oil fields are restarting wells that have been previously shut in response to the pandemic-driven collapse. But the reopening of wells is signaling that the industry has probably seen the worst of this, although it's a very slow ramp up back to pre-COVID oil price levels, and it's going to be a while before that turns around. So Mexico experienced severe manufacturing, as I mentioned, severe manufacturing interruptions due to COVID. The Mexican maquiladora plants are the key tier one suppliers for many Texas and U.S. manufacturers, autos, aerospace, electronics, healthcare, devices, etc. Mexico does not have a very strong healthcare system when compared to the U.S., so they were quickly overwhelmed when COVID hit. And they're doing a great job now, but they're very, very strict. If you've traveled down to Mexico in the last few months, very, very strict. And, their protocols are probably better than the U.S. now because they cannot afford to have another major COVID uptick. So, but, we really struggled with that and, spent a lot of time making sure that the supply chains continued to flow and working with the Mexican government and also our own federal government. So certainly positive things have happened in the last months. Things are looking up. Many of our TAM member companies almost immediately shifted to making PPE, ventilators, the sanitizers. They donated treatment drugs, our pharmaceutical group here at TAM, for COVID hospital patients. Also, a major Texas semiconductor manufacturer up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area moved up construction of their new $3 billion fab. So that's good news. And many of our food and beverage manufacturers obviously experienced record demand to satisfy millions of homebound grocery customers. So recent studies also show that 50% of our domestic manufacturers are now likely to bring production and sourcing back to North America. And hopefully that means Texas. Worldwide source supply chains may now be a negative for many U.S. industry sectors, dependent on timely deliveries of key components. And so reshoring manufacturing closer to our key markets. You got to remember the U.S. is still the largest economy in the world. We're going to see plants coming back, and that could become the biggest post-COVID prize for Texas and the USA. So Texas must be ready to compete for our share of this investment. We're going to be working this legislative session on Chapter 313, tax abatement reauthorization, COVID liability. We're going to be working to ensure workforce education and readiness skills funds. Money's going to be super, super tight, but for COVID recovery, we've got to have these elements in place to be ready for the onshoring, the reshoring, whatever term you want to use, for when these plants want to relocate back to and be closer to the world's largest economy. So I'll stop there and be glad to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Well, when the plants get back on full scale, do you think there'll be a shortage of workers?
We do believe that eventually we'll be back to where we will not have enough skilled workers. Absolutely. That is the number one problem that manufacturing CEOs pre-COVID were talking about, that multi-million numbers of positions would be unfilled over the next 10 years. And that's all levels, from engineers to, plant floor workers. We need everybody. And that is why a lot of stuff, that used to be manufactured in the U.S. went overseas because of that very reason. And so we need to be ready. We need to be ready in Texas, because those that want to come back will insist on making sure that there is a skilled workforce available before they even consider, the great state of Texas for manufacturing.
Hey, Tony,
Right.
Peyton Smith, got a quick question for you. Even before COVID, we'd all been seeing in news periodicals the ramp up of businesses relocating their corporate headquarters or second locations in Texas from California and the West Coast. And recently, with the fires they've been having and the tax issues and other issues that have impacted them pretty dramatically, we've seen sort of an uptick in interest in Texas. Have you noticed an even more accelerated ramp up in light of COVID coupled with those issues?
I think, Peyton, you will see that. The primary reason those corporate offices come here is we don't have, the corporate income tax. We have, a better opportunity for their employees to have a higher quality of life. Housing is cheaper. Their paychecks go further. When they bring their manufacturing here, they're centrally located, proximity-wise to their markets. We have the ports, we have the rail, we have the airports, we have, a skilled workforce, we have excellent education institutions, we have pretty much everything, and we have, tort law is reasonable. Our environmental regulations are reasonable. Our attitude is much more reasonable than other states and countries. So that's what attracts these companies to the great state of Texas.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Tony and George and Peyton and Representative Gonzàlez. At this time, we'll open up to any questions. If anybody would like to ask one of our panelists, you can type it in your Q&A box, and we'll be happy to pass it along. And also, if you'll have anything later after this call, please feel free to reach out to myself or Mark, and we'll be sure to coordinate getting your answer to you or connecting you with one of our panelists from today.
I had one thing before we wait for the questions. It may be a completely different topic, but how does this affect all the universities and all the, the finances around universities and all the businesses? Does this have an impact on what we're talking about here today? I think that is enough.
Hey, Tony and George, that's probably a you question, but I mean, all we're seeing in the news media is that they're scrambling for dollars just like everybody else is. So I would assume going into a session, they're going to come with their pocketbook open, wanting some of it to be filled up.
Yeah, this is George. I mean, you've seen the cuts that schools around the state and even around the country have made to be able to stay afloat. I think from a retail perspective, being the members that we have in college towns, essentially, where the community it revolves around the school, have definitely seen an impact because, you look at particularly last spring when students didn't come back after spring break. And so you had, you had what would be your traditional 2.5, 3 slow months of the summer become 5 to 6 months for a lot of those stores. And I think it affected stores large and small just because of the fact of where they're located in those college communities. So from that perspective, looking at it through a retail lens, it definitely had an impact for sure.
Right. Thanks, George.
Well, with that, everyone, we have not received any questions at this time, but again, please feel free to reach out to me and Mark at any time, and we really appreciate everybody's participation today, as well as all those that are listening in, and we're here to help and stand ready. So thank you all so much, and hope everybody has a great week.
Yeah, thank you very much. You all did a really great job. I appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.